Hey guys, I am Kristen Howerton. I'm here with my friend Paul Martin. We have been doing recaps, really, of the weeks leading up to the election for really the past year, and we wanted to kind of do a recap of the results. I mean, here we are. We were live last night, kind of watching, and we were stunned.
Yeah, so we started pretty early before any of the states were called, and I
Mm-hmm.
think like probably most of you, uh, I think there was just an assumption that it would be tough for Trump. Certainly, that's what
Yeah.
everybody thought, and so I do remember Dan Rather the previous night he was on CNN,
Mm-hmm.
and he was saying the one thing that we don't know is how many of those rural white voters will turn out. And I remember hearing that on
Yeah.
Monday night,
Yeah.
thinking, that's grandfather saying this. And it gave me a little queasy feeling,
Yeah.
and he ended up being right.
Yeah, yeah, and I think at the end of the day, that is really what swung the election. Well, I think two things, actually. I think the rural voters, and I also think there were a lot of people that ended up voting for Trump that didn't admit that they were voting for Trump.
Right. That silent Trump vote or something
Right.
like that.
The folks that just couldn't bring themselves to vote Democrat or vote for a Clinton, but, who never campaigned for Trump, who never spoke vocally, and who maybe, didn't know until really the very last minute. But, I think that was a contingency as well. But if you look at the numbers today, um, overwhelmingly, white Protestant Christians voted for Trump. The evangelicals came out and voted for Trump. White women, majority of white women voted for Trump. It is really confusing. I mean, I went to bed last night wondering what America I live in.
Hmm.
I really did.
Yeah. And clearly there are, we're going to talk more about within the church because we're both Christians.
Mm-hmm.
But clearly you have the U.S. population, the voting population, and then you have these different groups, these different populations within that population, subpopulations. One of them is the Protestant Christian church, and that's, I think, where
Uh-huh.
you and I really have found ourselves in the last few months scratching our heads because there
Right.
does seem to be such a disconnect
Yeah.
between the two groups within that group. And we're not talking about progressive Christians here.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about Republican evangelicals
Yeah.
that voted for Trump, but many, like myself, that didn't.
Yeah, and it's been interesting watching on Facebook this morning. Um, I mean, I had to block my own mom on Facebook this morning, and I have avoided doing that this entire election season. But this morning, she was feeling very defensive, as I think many people are. And what's confusing to me is, I was raised. I think that my generation is watching the people who raised us to be Christian, to be loving. I was raised to fight racism. I was raised to put faith into my politics, and we're watching the very people who sort of infuse these ideas totally make different decisions with their vote, and it's super confusing. And I feel that a lot of the people who are Christians who voted for Trump today are very defensive
Hmm.
and not necessarily logically so.
And it's hard to know because the Clinton voters have said, I voted for Clinton. I don't ever remember a presidential election in my life where people were so overt in their covering up. But I think there are many friends of mine that voted for Trump, but that wouldn't admit it.
I agree.
And that's just kind of, I mean, come on, just own up to it. Like, I
Well, I
voted
feel
for
the
Trump.
same way. I mean, I feel like I watched yesterday a lot of Christians like kind of posting their cute selfies that they voted, but not saying who they voted for, which I think is telling. Yeah, and Bill just said the evangelical church is now officially irrelevant, and I don't know that the evangelical church is irrelevant. I think they've completely lost credibility. I completely lost credibility. I mean, when you look at this past week and you see Jen Hatmaker being skewered by evangelicals for saying she'd go to a gay wedding, and evangelicals embracing a guy who talked about grabbing women in the pussy. What is that? So I think they've lost all credibility.
And it's interesting, today I'm seeing a lot of God is in control
Yes.
language, which is
Yes.
to me a very weak and frankly pathetic cop-out. Because if God is God, well, he's in control, we already know that, but that doesn't take away from the egregious things that this candidate said, that there's just no possible ethical or moral way that a man running for president could say that a Mexican-American federal judge should not be able to be a judge because he's Mexican. And evidently, tens of millions of evangelicals think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, and I think the whole God is in control thing too, it's just super dismissive because
Yeah.
God is always in control.
Yeah.
But God's been in control during apartheid and during the Rwandan genocide, and he was in control during Hitler's reign. I mean, that doesn't absolve us from atrocities happening. That doesn't absolve us or save us from the consequences of this vote. It doesn't. And I think, I am hoping against hope that, nothing calamitous happens, but...
Well, and the big question I have is, okay, I'm trying to play devil's advocate and think positively. Donald Trump being a marketer, did he know that the only way for him to win was to be as crazy
Yes.
as he was during the primaries and during the general? And is he going to now suddenly be sobered up and shift to,
Right.
A manager that rolls up his sleeve and gets things done? I don't think so.
Yeah,
but we'll
I
see.
have entertained that consolation for myself today, just thinking, maybe he was just appealing to the base, maybe he was just appealing to the lowest common denominator, knowing that works. He is a marketer. Maybe he's not quite as xenophobic as he's come off. Maybe that was a ploy to, again, appeal to the deplorables. But I don't know. I think that's probably who he is.
Right, and then how does that end up looking in the years ahead? And I was struck today with a graph that I saw. It was a map of the U.S., and they took the votes between 18 and 25 years old.
Yeah,
Did you see that?
I did.
Hillary would have over 500 electoral votes.
Yeah, I think that there were 4 or 5 red states.
And
with the millennials.
With
yeah.
the millennials. And I just think there's going to be something very interesting that happens both outside of the Christian church within that constituency, Bernie supporters that weren't Christians, but certainly Christians that, Christians period. I think that age demographic is onto something that their parents clearly aren't with regard to civil rights and social issues. And I think that's going to be some interesting ground, I think, in the years ahead.
Someone said you refuse to look at the Supreme Court justices. No, it's not that I refuse to look at them. I don't agree that we should try to overturn Roe v. Wade. I mean, I'm looking at it, and I just don't agree. I am personally pro-life, but I don't think that we should overturn Roe v. Wade. I think that would result in illegal abortions, and I think that there are other ways to fight and reduce abortions. But it's not a refusal to look at it, it's a different ideology.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I've said this before, but I lived in England for a couple of years, and some of the most staunch evangelicals in the country, just the abortion issue isn't the issue there. And oftentimes evangelicals here will say, well, they're liberal Christians. No, these are people that don't drink.
Right.
But the idea of abortion is thought of much more as a personal issue. In this country, it's very different. But I want to ask you a question. People are making comments about women who supported Trump. How, to you watching and to you, Christian, how as a woman, I'm not a woman, but I have 3 sisters and a mom, who I'm very close to all of them, how does that happen, given blatant, some of the most crude, on tape, on video, accounts of how he objectifies women in the most repulsive manner? How do women process both that, and then they go to click a box that says Donald Trump, I want him to be the model for my children?
Oh, I know. It's funny because, one of the things that I've been talking about, what I want to teach my kids is that you don't date a man like Trump, you don't marry a man like Trump, you don't be a man like Trump. He's nothing like I want my children to be. why did women vote for him? I think that we are swimming in a culture of misogyny. I think, and when you're swimming in something, similarly to white privilege, you don't see it. You don't see how murky the water is because you're in it. And I think that there is a lot of sort of self-loathing amongst women. We have just, I mean, personally, I think women have just been treated so shittily for so long that there are so many women that think that this is acceptable. Boys will be boys. I mean, they've just bought that this kind of treatment is okay, and it's just been normalized in our culture. I think that's why.
So do you think these are the same type of women that in the workplace, if their boss was making these types of comments, would kind of just giggle and brush it aside and not report it?
Well, yes, women have been doing that for years. Many women. I think that's all a part of the problem. It's for the same reason that when I've been subjected to things like that, I laugh and I brush it off because I don't want to seem like a bitch. I mean, that's the culture we live in. Women talk about this kind of thing all the time. And so, I mean, Trump is behaving in a way that's consistent with our culture and the way that we've been socialized as women to just deal and accept that kind of behavior.
And yet, in terms of women's rights compared to the 1950s, we've come a long way. Certainly with respect to domestic violence, issues like that, where women have spoken up. It's much more difficult for a man to be physically abusive toward his wife today than it was in the 1950s. Women in the workplace, and we've seen progress, and yet, like you're saying, the dominant DNA remains this kind of inferiority or this, what you're saying, whatever it is. Gosh.
Yeah. Man, I'll tell you, it was a rough conversation with my kids. And that's, as we were watching the election last night, I was at Paul's house and we had several friends over. And as I'm watching it, I mean, all I could think of is like, how I'm going to tell my kids. And my kids were in the next room watching a movie, and I was like trying to shield them from it. I was just like, I can't even, and so they went to bed and they were saying, what happened? What happened? I'm like, well, we don't know yet. Because I could not wrap my mind around how to frame this for them. And my daughter ended up staying up really late and kind of coming into my room and saying, I want to know who won. And I told her, and she just bawled. And, as she was crying, I kind of questioned, like, what's going on? What are these feelings about? And she said, I'm really worried about some of my classmates who I don't think are legal. And I think she's correct in that assumption. And she was real concerned about that, and I tried to calm her, that we live in a community where a large percentage of people are not legal, and that there's no way they're going to round them all up and deport all of them, and that I think her friends are probably safe for now. But then my boys woke up this morning and asked, and they were just deflated that we live in a country like this, and I had to have a pep talk with them about that we have our work cut out for us, and that we have to just continue to be the kind of people that we want our country to look like. But I think we're all a little stunned today.
Yeah, my daughter's a student. She's a senior in college, and she's like me. She's a moderate. I think she's a Republican. I'm not really sure. She didn't tell me. But she did vote for Hillary because she couldn't vote for Donald Trump. But she said on the campus, last night there were students crying. And she said, Dad, it wasn't hysterical. It wasn't hysteria. It wasn't these, crazy liberal progressives. People were just afraid and sad. Mm-hmm. And she said on the campus today, there were people in tears. I don't know if I've ever seen that before. And then a friend of mine is a teacher in New York, and she sent me a message today. She said that, today I went to work in poor white rural America. I heard junior high kids tell their classmates they'd have to get back on the boat, call each other students Hillary Jews, and chant Build the Wall. We had almost 10 suspensions. There were so many fights.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the fear, that this just emboldened a group. There was a KKK march in North Carolina. That is the fear, that this has emboldened white supremacists. You got a question, Paul, which was, how are you feeling about your protest vote? We didn't get to talk about that last night, but you ended up voting for Kasich.
Oh, that's right.
at the last minute. And one of the things I've really seen a lot today on social media is, sort of this kind of blaming of the third party voters or the protest voters, this is on you kind of thing.
Yeah, and before I answer that, I really want to get to Melissa's question because
okay.
I'm going to answer it. But will you just look at that because I really want to answer her question, Melissa. Thank you for asking that.
Okay.
It's the lesser of two evils argument, basically.
So please stop. She says, please stop assuming that people who voted for him agree with his ideology or think he's a good example. So many of them simply feel like the establishment, is worse.
I just don't, Melissa, I don't really see the equivalency there. I'm a Republican. I voted Republican my whole life. I voted for John Kasich. I wrote him in yesterday. And one might be against the establishment, whatever that even fucking means. Sorry. But when you have blatant racist comments against African Americans, against Mexicans, against Muslims, xenophobic comments against women, this is the fabric of what it means to be a good human being. Mm-hmm. And so one might be against the establishment, whatever that means, because we are representative democracy and we have a vote, and the thing in Washington, D.C. is a byproduct of something called a representative democracy. Mm-hmm. But I just don't see the false equivalency. I don't deny that people wanted change, but how any parent could, in the name of change, appoint someone to be the leader of the world, of the free world, who has this track record, this decade-long track record, with regard to human rights, civil rights, treatment of people, I don't buy it. So there you go.
Yeah, I have to agree. And one of the things that I said today is this whole don't call me a racist just because I voted for a racist. I mean, if you voted in someone with that ideology, you've supported it. If you voted for Trump, you have supported his racism. Yeah. You might not like it, and you might try to make an exception of that aspect of himself or his misogyny, and you might be trying to compartmentalize, which I think a lot of people are doing, and saying, well, I don't like the misogyny, I don't like the racism, but, and it's like, there's no but.
No, there isn't.
You just voted that in to lead our country.
Yeah. And that doesn't even factor in the millions of people, right? The millions of, I'm half Mexican. He said this judge shouldn't be a judge because he's a Mexican. The African Americans, comments about women, he never apologized. So you don't have repentance here. Had he repented? Had he said after those comments, sometimes I put my foot in my mouth, but he never did. And so what are those people to do? What is a federal judge, Judge Curiel, to do with the fact that the now President-elect of the United States said that he should not be a judge because he's a Mexican? Yeah. What does that do to our country? And I don't think we can sweep it under the rug. And I had people today saying, well, we need to be peaceful. There will be no peace until he could recognize the things that he said and the things that he did. The people who were offended by his words, just like all of you, when you're offended by your husband or offended by your wife, you don't just sweep it under the rug. There needs to be rectification of that wrong. And we have a lot of people in this country, especially minorities and people of other religions, that feel offended, rightly so.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And I don't think you can compartmentalize these aspects of him and then say, well, I was just voting for other things, or I was voting against the establishment. I want to touch on something quickly, and we should probably wrap up soon.
Abortion issue.
But one of the things I was really wondering last night, though, as I was seeing commentary, is, I'm not really sure that Hillary was the right candidate this election, because I think there is so much long-standing animosity towards the Clintons from the Republican Party that if there was a need for a switch vote, there's just too much baggage with the Clintons. Yeah. And, I heard so many people say I would never vote for a Clinton. And Hillary was never my candidate. But yeah, I do kind of wonder if that shot some of the Democratic chances, or the chance to defeat Trump. Just the fact that it was a Clinton, and people have so much bias and association with that.
And I get that, from a marketing standpoint, some of you that are saying the establishment and change. Well, clearly there's a lot of baggage, and there's nothing that she could have ever done to rid herself. I get that. Yeah. But again, as a Republican, in my mind, that was clearly better than somebody who's just fundamentally a bad person.
Yeah.
But evidently, I'm not in the majority within my church or country.
Likewise. All right, that's it for now. I think we'll probably have a lot more to say in the coming weeks
Yeah, we will.
on all of this. But thanks for joining. Thanks for watching with us over the past year. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.